When I look back into my journey as a hyperrealism artist, there are a few art supplies and tools I wish I had when I initially started. And the funny thing is, some of these art materials I never even knew they existed or how they could have improved and impacted my drawings. And after I started using some of these supplies, even I was amazed by the drastic improvement in my artwork because my shading and blending were a lot smoother, my details were a lot sharper and accurate, that even I sometimes couldn't even believe what I was creating. So in this video, I've divided these art supplies into 7 categories. So we are going to be talking about paper, graphite, charcoal, erasers, blenders, lighting. A lot of people don't talk about lighting, and then some other accessories that will take your drawings to that extra hyper realistic level. So if you want to see some of these accessories, just stick around till the end of this video. Trust me, you won't regret it. And the reason why I divided this video into these 7 categories is so I can show you how some of these tools were able to help me improve my drawings. My name is Ibrahim Kasta. I'm a hyperrealism artist and welcome to my YouTube channel. First, I'd like us to talk about paper and how they were able to improve my drawing. And here's the reason why I want to talk about paper first, because paper is kind of like the foundation for every drawing. If you get your paper wrong, you're already off to a bad start. Now that being said, here are the 2 most important parameters you need to look out for when trying to select your paper, which is the thickness and the smoothness. Now for a hyperrealism artist, you want your paper to be smooth and thick. Now don't forget this, your paper needs to be smooth and thick. So if you are new into hyperrealism and you've been using this generic printing paper, this is a sign for you to change into a more quality drawing paper like this. And here is why. When I started using smooth papers, I realized my blending and shadings were a lot smoother than they used to be when I was just using the other regular and inferior drawing papers. Also, I was able to create as much level of detail as I needed to create on my drawings. Details down to skin pores, hair strands and other really fine details like this. And also, here is why you would want your paper to be thick, because with thick papers, I realized I could lay a lot more graphite and charcoal particles onto my paper. And just alone, the quality of the thick paper, it doesn't tear or buckle easily. So it just gives you this nice hyper-realistic look overall when you have a thick and a smooth paper. Now personally, the brand I use is the Strathmore brand, and I use their 80-pound paper. It comes in a roll and you can get this either on Amazon or any local art store close to you. Next, I would like us to talk about graphite. And graphite comes in both pencil and powdered foam. My journey with graphite has actually kind of been really rocky, because there was a point in my journey when I stopped using graphite because of how much it shined and just the way it made my drawing feel overall. So I didn't like this feeling, so I just stopped using graphite and I moved on to charcoal. But then I realized what I was missing with graphite, so I came back to graphite, and now I really use graphite for more of detailing while I use charcoal for shading. Now most often I use the pencil form of graphite for my detailing. I rarely use the powder form, because whenever I use powder, it's more of charcoal powder I use. But we are not talking about charcoal yet. Now if you want to get your graphite pencils, they need to be really good quality pencils. Now the most common and popular brand that I know I can recommend is General's, Staedtler and Faber-Castell. These are, I think, the 3 top brands when it comes to graphite. And the reason why you want to use really good quality graphite pencils is because they give this really nice and quality look on your drawings that if you put side by side with a cheap graphite pencil, I mean, you're just going to be able to tell the difference. And also, they don't break as much as the low quality graphite pencils, because I think they have better binding agents, so they don't just break anyhow. And also, the powdered form is also great for covering a large surface area at once if you are working on a really large drawing and you're trying to create really smooth shading. I rarely use the powder form, because whenever I use powder, it's more of charcoal powder I use. And now speaking of charcoal, because I think I've been talking about charcoal too much, so let's just move on to charcoal, which is kind of the next. So for charcoal also comes in pencil and powder form. Now I use both the pencil and powder form for charcoal because of how versatile and essential charcoal is to my own style of creating realistic drawings. So most often when I'm trying to go really dark or trying to work on some fine details, I use the charcoal pencils. When I say fine details, I don't mean details like skin pores, because for those ones I use more of graphite, because graphite is easier to control. But when it comes to details like drawing hair, I tend to lean more towards using charcoal pencils. And whenever I want to create smooth skin tones, I found charcoal powder was the best. But also this depends on the blending materials you use to apply the charcoal, which we're also going to be getting into later in the video. So for charcoal powder, I could get really smooth blendings on my drawings, and charcoal powder also gave me the ability to cover a large surface area in very little time. So charcoal powder didn't only make my drawings look better and get me smoother shadings, they actually also kind of made me faster and more efficient when I started using charcoal powder. So I'm going to recommend you don't limit yourself to just charcoal pencils, and you also explore using charcoal powders. Next, let's move on to erasers. So as a kid growing up, the only significance I saw erasers for was for corrections. But my whole perspective changed when I started creating realistic drawings. And here's why. A lot of the details you see on my drawings were created by either one form of eraser I have or the other. And in this particular category, I'm going to be sharing with you all the different types of erasers I use, why I use them, and how I use them. So first, let's talk about the mono zero eraser or the mechanical eraser. They both kind of have the same function, but the mono zero eraser is a lot smaller, so you can get a lot finer details with the mono zero eraser, while the mechanical eraser is a little bit bigger than the mono zero eraser. But that doesn't mean you also can't use it to get really fine details on your drawings. It just kind of depends on what you feel is going to be best for whatever it is you are trying to draw in the moment. And the great thing about mono zero eraser and mechanical erasers are the fact that they give me the ability to create very fine and sharp details on my drawings to kind of contrast it from the rest of the drawing. Then next is the electrical eraser. Now the electric eraser kind of has the same function as the mono zero eraser and the mechanical eraser. The only difference is the electric eraser is a lot faster when it works, because it works with a propeller which rotates the eraser at a really high speed. So it just uses friction. I don't really need to press the eraser into the paper. The friction of the rotation just kind of takes off either the graphite or charcoal of the paper, which kind of makes it very fast for me to work. But then you also have to keep in mind that sometimes being fast isn't always the best. Sometimes you need to take your time to decide what you want to do next and what detail you want to lay down. So at some of these points, using the electric eraser is not really advisable. And also, because of the friction of the electric eraser, it also kind of damages the tooth of your paper a little bit. This is also actually why it is very important that you use a thick paper, because when you use tools like the electric eraser, it's not going to just damage your paper anyhow. The thick paper can actually undo the friction from the electric eraser, but the more often you use those electric erasers on your paper, the more you kind of damage the tooth. But I mean, I'm not trying to say the electric eraser just damages the tooth of your paper outrightly, but I'm just saying if you use your electric eraser too much on just maybe one particular spot, you're going to see it's going to start to ruin the tooth of the paper at that particular spot. So this is why I use the electric eraser sparingly on my drawings, and I tend to use more of the mono zero and the mechanical eraser when trying to create some fine details. And next is the kneadable eraser. Now this is my personal favorite because the kneadable eraser is so underrated but yet the most goated, because the kneadable eraser literally can perform the functions of every other eraser I just mentioned. The only issue now might be if I'm trying to use it to perform the function of these other erasers, I might be a little bit slow, but it's definitely going to get the job done almost just as well as those materials are going to get them done. But also the kneadable eraser also has its own function that I use it for, which helps me create this dynamic and natural texture on my drawings. And also if I kind of want to lift off a little graphite or maybe charcoal off of my paper, and I don't just want to go outrightly and just erase the drawing, maybe I go just a little bit too dark on one spot, and then I want to go just a little bit lighter, I can just go in with my kneadable eraser and lift off a little bit of the graphite or charcoal off of the paper. And here's also one very interesting thing about the kneadable eraser is the fact that I can mold it to any shape or form I want to create really amazing details and textures on my drawings. This is actually one of the reasons I love the kneadable eraser so much. I can even form a very pointy edge on the kneadable eraser, which is when I'm trying to like use it for the function of maybe the electric eraser or the mono zero eraser. But overall, the kneadable eraser is like the most powerful tool when it comes to detailing because it's very versatile and it can perform the function of every other tool. So if you are going into hyperrealism and you always had this idea that the function of erasers were for correction, let this be your sign now that erasers are for a lot more and they're actually the key to the realistic look you see on my drawings. Next, let's talk about blending materials and how they improve my drawings. And in this particular category, I'm going to be mentioning some tools that you probably have never thought of, and when you hear them you would wonder that, hold up, this actually makes a lot of sense. Why did I never think of this? And the thing about blending materials is that they are very essential into your hyperrealism journey because they help you create this really smooth texture on your drawings. And when I started using the right blending materials, my drawings just went to a whole nother level. So when I initially started creating realistic drawings, sometimes I would use my finger, which I would strongly recommend again. Then when I started to learn more and I started to get better, I started using the cutting board. Now this was when I couldn't afford some of the other materials I'm going to be mentioning in this category. So then when I was working on a budget, I used to use the cutting wool and the cutting board. Now I use the cutting wool for a more broad shading and blending, while I use the cutting board for a more detailed based blending. But here's the issue I had with cutting wool. Some of the shading and blendings I used to get were kind of uneven and were not as smooth as I knew that my drawings could get, because even though my blendings looked smooth, but then I could tell that something was missing and they were not as smooth as they could actually be. So I decided to explore some makeup tools. I know, right? Makeup tools. Why did you never think of that? So I actually use some makeup brushes and makeup sponge to blend in my drawings. Now the reason why makeup tools are really good for blending is because they are very soft and smooth. If you feel the bristles of a makeup brush, you realize how soft and flexible it is. And these brushes come in different sizes from small to big, and the small can be used for blending in smaller areas, while the bigger ones are a lot better for covering a large surface area. And the great thing about these makeup materials is when I started using them, my drawings were as smooth as I always knew my drawings could have been. Now the thing about makeup sponge is makeup sponge also performs in a very similar way to the makeup brush, but with the makeup sponge you can't really go as dark as you'll be able to go with the makeup brush. So if you're trying to create a smooth texture but then you don't want to go really dark, I would really advise you use the makeup sponge, because with the makeup sponge, even if you mistakenly put too much charcoal on the paper, you're not going to be able to go as dark as you normally would be able to with charcoal powder. So makeup sponges actually prevent you from going a lot darker than you actually intend to go on your drawings. So I'd really recommend you explore some makeup tools like the brushes and the makeup sponges. Now you can go the extra mile and explore some other tools that makeup artists use, and you can get these makeup materials in any makeup store in your area. I think you should also be able to order this from Amazon, even though I've never tried to order it from Amazon before. And now that we've talked about creating smooth texture, let's talk about creating a more detailed oriented blending. Now I told you earlier that I used the cutting board for my detailed oriented blending. Now cutting boards didn't actually really give me the result I wanted, but just out of a lack of a better tool to use, I just kind of managed them. But then as I grew and I got exposed to more information, I realized the blending stump was a better alternative. Now blending stumps can help you create some really nice and amazing blending effects on your drawings. So there are sometimes I would like to create a blurry effect. Maybe if I'm drawing hair strands, and then I want to make it look a little bit blurry, this is where my blending stump kind of comes in really handy. Or if I'm trying to create skin pores and I want to blend in either the charcoal or graphite I just laid down. Even though I hardly use charcoal for skin pores, I use more of graphite. But whenever I want to blend some of these really fine details, this is where blending stumps come really handy because of their sharp mouth and sharp edges. And blending stumps are also not limited to detailed oriented blending. They can actually also be used for a more broad and wide blending. The only difference is that they might actually take a lot more time to cover a large surface area. So this is why it's always better to just use a bigger makeup sponge to cover a large surface area. And also you can use regular paint brushes, but personally I'll just recommend makeup brushes because they work really well. But if for the meantime what you have is a paintbrush, you are totally fine using a paintbrush. So let's take a quick recap on the blending materials I talked about in these categories. So we talked about the makeup brush, the makeup sponge, and the blending stump. Now these three are the pinnacles of the very smooth shadings you see on my drawings, the smooth and amazing texture you see on my drawings. So if you'd like to see this kind of texture and smooth blending and shading on your drawings, you should consider using these three materials. Now let's talk about lighting, because this is actually really talked about. It's as if it's something we all know we need, but yet we don't actually really talk about it. It's kind of like this unspoken thing. So I'm going to be changing that in this video, because you need to understand that if you can't see what you are drawing, there's no way you'll be able to create a really good quality artwork. Because the thing about having the proper lighting when you draw is you can see your drawings clearly, and you know when you are going as dark as you need to go or when you are going as light as you need to go. Because when you don't have the proper lighting, you can tend to not go as dark as you need to, and it kind of gives you this illusion that you've already gone the darkest you can. But when you go to a properly lit area and you see your drawing, you see that this part that you actually thought was dark is actually not as dark as you thought it was. When I started using proper lighting, I actually saw how this helped improve my drawings, and I could get different level of depths in my drawings, and the range of values I could create were a lot wider, because now I could actually see what my drawings really looked like under even natural light. So if you're just starting out in hyperrealism, invest in good lights, because when I started using lights, this actually changed the game for me, because now I could see every single thing I was doing and I was working on. And actually, besides just even creating really smooth and nice range of values on your drawings, it also helps you when you are detailing, because there are some very fine and very tiny details you might want to work on that if your environment is not well lit, you won't be able to see some of these details. But when you use the proper light, you are going to be able to create a lot of these really fine details. And also, it's important you know your light has to be the right temperature. Now you don't want it to be too cool, and you also don't want it to be too warm. Just something in the middle to give you that kind of natural light, so you kind of get a feel of what your drawings would actually look like in a natural space. So personally, I make use of the LED 600 when I'm drawing. You don't have to use this exact same light. There are a lot of other good lights out there that you can explore, but I'm just going to advise it's important you get a really good light, because this will change the game for you. Now we've got into the last category in this video, where we are going to be talking about some of these extra accessories I promised you in the beginning of this video, because these have actually really changed the game for my drawings, and I really believe they can do the same for you too. And one of which is a sanding paper. Now I know you think it's mostly used by people who do woodwork and stuff like that, but they're actually also really good for artists. You can use them to get really sharper edges on your pencil, and also if you incorporate using the blending stump in your artworks, there are points when your blending stumps might get a little too dirty, or you want to get a really sharper edge back on your blending stump, because at some point it kind of gets a little blunt when you use it often to blend. So sometimes you might want to make it sharper. This is where the sanding paper can also come really handy. And also sometimes when you want to sharpen your eraser, your mechanical or monozero eraser, the sanding paper can also be really good for doing this. And also you might have seen some of my drawings where I'm using this white pencil to create these very bright details on my drawing. These pencils are called pastel pencils, and sometimes they are actually the white charcoal pencil. So whenever you see me doing this on my drawings, is either I'm using the pastel pencil or the charcoal pencil, but I actually prefer using the pastel pencils a lot more, because the pastel pencil kind of gives a cool hue on my drawings, while the white charcoal pencil gives a little more warm hue on my drawings. But I kind of prefer that cool feel on my drawings. But also it actually kind of sometimes depends on what I'm working on, if I need to go cool or warm. So whenever I need to go cool, I use the white pastel pencil, but whenever I need to go warm, I use the white charcoal pencil. But most often, because of the kind of style I work with, I mostly tend to go more with the white pastel pencils. Now it's important for you to know I actually don't really use these pencils as often. I only use them on rare occasions, whenever I want to play around with lighting and contrast. I want to create this very sharp highlight, like maybe if I'm working on an afro and I want to create this really nice reflecting effect of curly hair strands. So at some of these points I just use my pastel pencils to create some of these details, but I don't use them as often as you might think I actually do. Most of the bright details you see on my drawings are actually often done by my electric eraser because of the friction. It takes off every single material of the paper, so it makes the paper as white as it initially was before I kept charcoal or either graphite on it. So most of the bright details you see on my drawings are from my electric erasers. But when I want to go the extra mile and go a lot brighter, I use my white pastel or white charcoal pencils. But if I get to a point where I've already laid down so much charcoal or graphite on a particular spot and I cannot go really bright as I want, this is when I use the white pastel pencil. And here's the thing about white pastel and charcoal pencil, they actually don't really well on graphite. So if you are using graphite on a large surface area and you know you want to detail later, I would strongly advise against using graphite in some places, because if you'd like to use your white pastel pencil or charcoal pencil on it, later on you might not be able to do that. The last accessory I would like to recommend is a drawing glove. Now before I started using the drawing glove, I used to smudge my drawing a bit, and sometimes I get the oils on my skin on my drawings, which kind of ruins that patch or spot on my paper, because when the oil on my skin gets on the paper, when I try to shade on that part, the shading on that spot is always a little darker than the other parts of my drawing, which throws off the texture and the smooth tone I'm trying to create on my drawing. So I really recommend the drawing gloves because they prevent you from getting the oil on your skin onto your paper, and they also prevent you from smudging your charcoal or graphite all over your paper. I mean, it's very hard to prevent smudging because it's almost kind of inevitable, but then these drawing gloves are actually going to help you prevent it a lot more, because you don't want your paper looking very messy. You want to at least have this level of neatness to your drawings. But then if you get any smudging, you can always just erase it off of your paper, but you don't want to erase too much because it's going to ruin the tooth of your paper. So you want to limit the amount of times you actually have to erase to clean up the smudging. So this is why I'll recommend using the glove, even though you don't really have to. Whether you're just starting out as a hyperrealism artist or you already have a little more experience, I believe these supplies can take you to that next level you've always dreamed of getting to. And now we've gotten to the end of this video, and I just want to say a really big thank you to you for sticking around till the end. And I hope the tools and tips I've given in this video are going to be helpful in creating your own realistic drawings. So if you found this video really helpful, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe so you can get more tips like this to help you improve your drawings. And I'd actually also like to hear from you some of the tools that have helped you improve your drawings over the years. So please drop them in the comments below. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you don't miss out when I drop my next video on the shading techniques that will help you take your drawings to the next level. See you at the next one.